The dust storm had been raging for 2 days when Winnie Blackburn arrived in Hamilton, Nevada, bound and gagged in the back of a covered wagon, a price tag pinned to her simple cotton dress as if she were no more than cattle at auction. It was 1876, and the West was still wild enough that a woman could be sold without much question, especially a woman who rarely spoke. The driver pulled the wagon to a halt outside the Dusty Spade saloon, where most of the town's business transactions took place. Winnie had not uttered a word since leaving Missouri 3 weeks ago. Not when the family she worked for decided she wasn't worth keeping. Not when they traded her to the traveling merchant for supplies. And not when that same merchant announced he'd sell her to the highest bidder in Nevada territory. "Got a fine working woman here," the merchant called as he yanked her from the wagon. "Young, strong, and won't talk your ear off like most females. Bidding starts at $20. The men gathered around her like wolves, their eyes hungry in ways that made Winnie's skin crawl. She was 22, and though she'd been born free, her life had been one of servitude since her parents died when she was 14. Being quiet wasn't a choice. Words simply abandoned her when fear took hold, and fear had been her constant companion for years. $30, called a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth. 35, countered another, whose breath reeked of whiskey. The bids continued, each one securing Winnie's fate more firmly than the last. She kept her eyes downcast, focusing on the dusty ground beneath her feet. The merchant had made it clear she was being sold as a housekeeper, but everyone knew what that often meant in towns like Hamilton. $100. The voice was deep and steady, cutting through the commotion. A hush fell over the crowd as they turned to see who had made such a substantial offer. Mitchell Drake sat atop his chestnut stallion, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat. Dust coated his leather vest and denim trousers, and a gun hung at his hip, not unusual for these parts, but the way he wore it suggested he knew how to use it well. $100? The merchant repeated, eyes wide with surprise. For this silent creature? Mitchell dismounted in one fluid movement, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He approached Winnie, keeping a respectful distance. Unlike the others, he didn't leer or reach for her. Instead, he studied her face, noting the intelligence in her eyes despite her obvious fear. "I'll take her," he said simply, pulling a leather pouch from his vest and counting out the coins. The merchant could barely contain his glee. "She's a quiet one, hasn't spoken a word since I got her. Some might find that unsettling." Mitchell handed over the money and turned to Winnie. "I like the silence between us," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. Words aren't always necessary. He untied her hands and removed the cloth from her mouth. Winnie rubbed her wrists, confusion evident on her face. This man had just purchased her, yet he was freeing her bonds immediately. "My ranch is half a day's ride from here," Mitchell explained, his voice matter of fact. "I need someone to cook and keep house. You'll have your own quarters, and no one will bother you there." Winnie nodded, still not trusting herself to speak. She'd learned long ago that silence was safer than words. "Can you ride?" Mitchell asked. Another nod. "Good." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, maintaining a respectful distance despite their proximity. As they rode away from Hamilton, Winnie felt the stares of the townspeople. She'd been sold for her silence, but for the first time, that very silence seemed to be valued rather than merely tolerated. She didn't know what awaited her at Mitchell Drake's ranch, but somehow, it felt like the beginning of something rather than another ending. The ride to Mitchell's ranch took longer than the promised half-day. The dust storm had worsened, forcing them to seek shelter in a small cave for several hours. Mitchell built a small fire and offered Winnie some jerky and water from his canteen. "We should reach the ranch by nightfall," he said, breaking the long silence. "Storm's moving east." Winnie accepted the food with a nod of thanks. She studied him cautiously as he tended the fire. Mitchell Drake was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. His face was weathered from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he was in his early 30s. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with hints of gray at the temples, despite his relative youth. "You don't have to be afraid," Mitchell said, without looking up. "I meant what I said. You'll be my housekeeper, nothing more. I won't harm you." Winnie swallowed hard, summoning courage from some hidden reserve. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Mitchell's head snapped up, surprise evident in his hazel eyes. "She speaks," he said with a small smile. "Good to know." Not often, Winnie admitted, dropping her gaze. Words, they don't come easy. No need to explain, Mitchell said. Like I said, I appreciate the quiet. My last housekeeper talked from sunup to sundown, drove me half mad. The storm passed, and they continued their journey across the rugged Nevada landscape. Mitchell's ranch came into view just as the sun was setting, a modest but well-maintained property with a main house, barn, and several outbuildings. A small creek ran alongside it, providing precious water in the arid terrain. It's not much, Mitchell said as they approached, but it's home. He helped Winnie dismount, his touch gentle but impersonal. A border collie came bounding toward them, barking excitedly. That's Bandit, Mitchell explained. Don't worry, he's friendly. Bandit sniffed Winnie's skirt curiously before wagging his tail in apparent approval. Winnie reached down hesitantly to pat his head, earning an enthusiastic lick on her hand. He likes you, Mitchell observed. That's a good sign. Bandit's a better judge of character than most people I know. Mitchell showed Winnie to a small but clean room at the back of the house, separate from the main living area, but connected by a covered walkway. It contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a wash basin. This is your space, he said. No one will enter without your permission, including me. The kitchen's through there. He pointed to a door at the other end of the walkway. I usually leave for the range at dawn and return by dusk. You'll have your meals provided, of course, and Sundays off. Is that agreeable? Winnie nodded, overwhelmed by the unexpected consideration. Good. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll have a bath drawn for you in the morning. You must be tired after our journey. Rest well, miss. He paused, and Winnie realized he didn't even know her name. Blackburn, she supplied softly. Winnie Blackburn. Miss Blackburn, he finished with a slight tip of his hat. Welcome to the Flying D Ranch. With that, Mitchell left her alone, closing the door behind him. Winnie sat on the edge of the bed, hardly daring to believe her change in circumstances. For the first time in years, she had a room of her own, a door she could close, a space that was hers alone. She lay down, still fully clothed, and allowed herself to cry silently until exhaustion claimed her. Morning came, with the crow of a rooster. Winnie woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of the previous day rushed back, and she quickly rose to prepare for her first day of work. She found Mitchell in the kitchen, frying bacon on the cast-iron stove. Morning, he said without turning around. Coffee's hot. Help yourself. Winnie poured a cup, savoring the rich aroma. Thank you, she murmured. I don't usually cook, Mitchell explained, sliding the bacon onto a plate. But I figured you might need a day to settle in. There's a list of chores on the table, nothing too demanding. The pantry's stocked, and there's a vegetable garden out back. I don't have many requirements, just that meals are on time and the house is kept in decent order. Winnie nodded, taking the list. It was reasonable cleaning, cooking, laundry, tending the garden. Nothing she hadn't done before, but the conditions seemed far better than any previous position. I'll be back by sundown, Mitchell said, finishing his coffee. If you need anything, Warren Baxter at the general store in town knows me. He can help if there's an emergency. After Mitchell left, Winnie explored the house. It was simple but solid, with a main room that served as both dining and sitting area, Mitchell's bedroom, and a study filled with more books than Winnie had ever seen outside a proper library. She ran her fingers along the spines, surprised by the variety. History, literature, science, even poetry. The house was remarkably clean for a bachelor's residence, but it lacked the touches that made a house a home. No photographs adorned the walls, no keepsakes cluttered the surfaces. It felt temporary somehow, despite the quality of the furniture and the care with which everything was maintained. Winnie set to work, finding comfort in the familiar routine of household tasks. She swept and dusted, gathered eggs from the hen house, and assessed the garden's offerings for the evening meal. By late afternoon, she'd prepared a simple but hearty stew with fresh biscuits, the aroma filling the kitchen as the sun began its descent. Mitchell returned precisely at sundown, as promised. He removed his hat and boots at the door, washed at the basin outside, and entered the kitchen with his hair still damp. Something smells good, he remarked, hanging his gun belt on a peg by the door. Rabbit stew, Winnie said quietly, placing bowls on the table. And biscuits. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Mitchell's compliments on the meal and practical questions about her day. Had she found everything she needed? Was her room comfortable? Was the list of chores reasonable? Winnie answered with nods or the briefest of responses, but Mitchell didn't seem to mind. True to his word, he appeared to appreciate the lack of chatter. After dinner, he surprised her by helping clear the table. "I'll wash up," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "You cooked." "It's my job," Winnie protested softly. "Maybe so, but I'm not a tyrant. Fair division of labor in the evenings seems reasonable." As they worked side by side, Mitchell drying the dishes she washed, Winnie stole glances at his profile. There was a stillness about him that matched her own, a self-contained quality that didn't demand interaction, but didn't reject it either. Days passed in this fashion, establishing a rhythm to their shared existence. Winnie gradually became more comfortable in her new surroundings, and Mitchell remained true to his word, respectful of her space, and seemingly content with their mostly silent interactions. After 2 weeks, Winnie noticed Mitchell limping slightly when he returned one evening. "You're hurt," she said, as he lowered himself into his chair at the dinner table. Mitchell looked surprised, both at her observation and her initiated conversation. "It's nothing. Stepped in a gopher hole while mending fences." Without thinking, Winnie went to the cabinet where she'd discovered medical supplies and returned with bandages and a jar of salve. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his ankle. Mitchell hesitated before nodding. Winnie knelt beside his chair and gently removed his boot and sock. The ankle was swollen and bruised, but not broken. She applied the salve with careful fingers, then wrapped the joint snugly. "You have a healer's touch," Mitchell remarked as she worked. "Where did you learn this?" "My mother was a midwife," Winnie answered, surprising herself with the volunteered information. "She taught me." "She taught you well." Winnie finished the bandaging and rose to her feet. "Keep it wrapped for a few days. Try not to walk on it too much." Mitchell's lips curved in a wry smile. "Doctor's orders?" Winnie felt her cheeks warm at his teasing tone. "If you like," she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her own lips. That evening marked a subtle shift in their relationship. The silence between them remained comfortable, but occasional conversations began to punctuate their days. Winnie learned that Mitchell had come to Nevada 5 years earlier from Texas, that he had no family to speak of, and that he'd built the ranch from nothing through hard work and determination. In turn, she shared fragments of her own past, her childhood in Missouri, her parents' death from influenza, her years of service in various households. She never mentioned the worst of her experiences, but Mitchell seemed to understand there were shadows she preferred not to illuminate. One evening, nearly a month after her arrival, Mitchell returned with a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said, placing it on the table beside her. Winnie looked at him in confusion. "What is it?" "Open it and see." Inside the package was a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Winnie ran her fingers over the embossed cover in wonder. "I noticed you looking at the books in my study," Mitchell explained. "Thought you might enjoy having one of your own." "I can't accept this," Winnie said, though she couldn't bring herself to set the book down. "It's too much." "It's a book, Miss Blackburn, not a diamond necklace," Mitchell replied with a hint of amusement. "Besides, I enjoy discussing what I read, and it's hard to do that when you haven't read the same material." It was the longest speech she'd heard from him, and Winnie couldn't help but smile at his roundabout way of suggesting they might talk more. "Thank you," she said simply, clutching the book to her chest. That night, Winnie read by lamplight until her eyes grew heavy. The poem spoke to something deep within her, the beauty of observation, the power of silence, the richness of an interior life. When she finally drifted off to sleep, the book lay open beside her, a bridge between her world and Mitchell's. The summer heat intensified as July approached. Mitchell spent long days on the range, returning each evening sun-burned and exhausted. Winnie adapted her cooking to the weather, preparing cold suppers that wouldn't require heating the already sweltering kitchen. One particularly brutal afternoon, when even the chickens sought refuge in the shade, Winnie heard hoofbeats approaching the house. Thinking Mitchell had returned early, she went to the door, only to find 3 unfamiliar men dismounting in the yard. "Hello there, little lady," called the leader, a thick-set man with a scar running along his jawline. "Your master home?" Winnie's throat constricted with familiar fear. "Mr. Drake is out on the range," she managed, her voice barely audible. "That's a shame," the man said, approaching the porch. "We've got business with him." Something in his tone made Winnie's skin crawl. She began to close the door, but the man moved quickly, wedging his boot in the opening. "Now, don't be unfriendly," he drawled. "We've ridden a long way. Least you could do is offer us some water." Winnie's mind raced. These men meant trouble. She could feel it in the way they looked at the house, at her, but refusing them outright might provoke violence. "Wait here," she said, pushing against his boot. "I'll bring water out." The man exchanged glances with his companions before removing his foot. "Much obliged." Winnie closed the door and hurried to the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she filled a pitcher with water and gathered cups on a tray. Mitchell kept a shotgun mounted above the kitchen door, but she had no idea how to use it. Besides, she was outnumbered. When she returned to the porch, the men had spread out around the yard. One was peering into the barn, another examining the chicken coop. The leader stood at the foot of the porch steps. "Here's your water," Winnie said, setting the tray on the porch railing. The man took a cup, but made no move to drink. "So, you work for Drake? Just the two of you out here?" Winnie didn't answer, backing toward the door. "I asked you a question, girl," the man said, his tone hardening. "Leave her be, Harley." Mitchell's voice came from the edge of the property. He sat atop his horse, rifle balanced casually across his saddle, but there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. "Mitchell Drake," the man called, Harley said, turning with a false smile. "Just the man we came to see." "Winnie," Mitchell said, without taking his eyes off the intruders, "go inside, please." Winnie retreated to the house, but remained near the window, listening. "What do you want, Harley?" Mitchell asked, dismounting but keeping his rifle at the ready. "Message from Mr. Calloway," Harley replied. "He's still mighty interested in your property, offering double what he proposed last year. And my answer's still the same. This land isn't for sale." Harley's friendly demeanor slipped. "Mr. Calloway doesn't like to be refused. He's a patient man, but even patience has limits. Is that a threat? Call it friendly advice. You're one man on a decent piece of land that happens to control the only reliable water source for miles around. Mr. Calloway's expanding his operation. He needs this water. There are other sources," Mitchell countered. "Not as convenient, not as plentiful." Harley took a step closer. "Think about it, Drake. A man alone out here is vulnerable. Things happen. Accidents." Mitchell's expression remained impassive, but his grip on the rifle tightened. "I suggest you and your friends leave now, Harley, and tell Calloway if he sends anyone else to threaten me or frighten my housekeeper, I won't be as hospitable next time." For a tense moment, Winnie thought violence was inevitable. Then Harley laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Have it your way, Drake. For now." He signaled to his companions, and they mounted their horses. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. As they rode away, Mitchell remained standing in the yard, rifle still at the ready, until they were out of sight. Only then did he enter the house, his face grim. "Are you all right?" he asked Winnie, who stood trembling near the window. She nodded, then shook her head, honesty winning out. "They frightened me." Mitchell's expression softened. "I'm sorry you had to face them alone. I didn't expect Calloway to try again so soon." "Who is Calloway?" Winnie asked, following Mitchell to the kitchen, where he poured himself a glass of water. "Victor Calloway, cattle baron from up north. He's been buying up land all through this territory, expanding his empire." Mitchell's voice was bitter. "He's got his eye on the Flying D because of the creek. Water rights are everything out here. Why not sell?" Winnie asked. "If he's dangerous—" "This is my home," Mitchell interrupted firmly. "I built it from nothing. Every fence post, every nail in this house, it's mine. I won't be driven off by threats." Winnie understood stubborn pride. She'd seen it in her father, who had refused to flee Missouri during an outbreak of violence against freedmen, insisting they had as much right to their home as anyone. That decision had cost her parents their lives. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. Mitchell set down his glass, looking thoughtful. "First, I need to warn the neighbors. Calloway won't stop with me. Then I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak with the sheriff." He glanced at Winnie. "You should come with me. It's not safe for you to be alone here while this is happening." The idea of returning to Hamilton made Winnie's stomach clench with anxiety. She hadn't been to town since the day Mitchell purchased her, and the thought of facing those who had witnessed her humiliation was almost unbearable. "I'd rather stay," she said, her voice barely audible. Mitchell studied her face, seeming to understand her reluctance. "All right, but keep the doors locked, and there's a shotgun above the door there. Do you know how to use it?" Winnie shook her head. "I'll show you tonight, just in case." That evening, after dinner, Mitchell took Winnie outside and taught her the basics of handling the shotgun. Her hands shook at first, the weapon feeling alien and dangerous, but Mitchell was patient, demonstrating the proper stance and grip until she felt more confident. "I pray you never need to use this," he said as they returned to the house. "But knowing you can defend yourself brings me some peace of mind." Mitchell left for town early the next morning, promising to return before nightfall. The house felt eerily quiet in his absence. Winnie tried to focus on her usual tasks, but every sound, a branch scraping against the roof, Bandit barking at a rabbit, made her jump. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising one of the sudden, violent storms common in the Nevada summer. Winnie brought in the laundry from the line and secured the shutters, watching anxiously for Mitchell's return. The storm broke just as dusk was falling, rain lashing the windows and wind howling around the eaves. There was still no sign of Mitchell. Winnie paced the kitchen, peering out whenever lightning illuminated the yard. Had he been delayed by the weather, or had something worse happened? A crash from the barn startled her out of her worried thoughts. Bandit, who had been dozing by the stove, leaped to his feet, growling at the door. Winnie's heart raced. It could be Mitchell, she told herself, seeking shelter from the storm. Or it could be Harley and his men, returning as promised. The shotgun stood in the corner where Mitchell had left it. Winnie hefted it with trembling hands, remembering his instructions. Keep the barrel pointed down until ready to shoot. Finger off the trigger until the target is identified. "Stay," she whispered to Bandit, who whined but obeyed. Clutching a lantern in one hand and the shotgun in the other, Winnie ventured onto the porch. Rain immediately soaked her dress, and the wind nearly extinguished the lantern. She sheltered the flame with her body as best she could, straining to see through the downpour. Another crash came from the barn, followed by a horse's frightened whinny. Someone or something was definitely inside. Gathering her courage, Winnie descended the porch steps and made her way across the muddy yard. The barn door stood partially open, swinging in the wind, the likely source of the crashing sound. Winnie approached cautiously, raising the lantern to illuminate the interior. "Mitchell?" she called, her voice nearly lost in the storm. No answer came, but the horses were clearly agitated, moving restlessly in their stalls. Winnie stepped inside, grateful to be out of the rain. She moved deeper into the barn, checking each stall. Mitchell's stallion was still absent, confirming he hadn't returned. As she turned to leave, a shadow separated itself from the darker recesses of the barn. Winnie raised the shotgun instinctively, her heart pounding in her ears. "Don't shoot!" came a weak voice. "It's me!" Mitchell stumbled forward, clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his shirt dark in the lantern light. "Mitchell!" Winnie set down the lantern and shotgun, rushing to support him as he swayed on his feet. "What happened?" "Ambush," he gasped, leaning heavily against her. "Just outside town, 3 of them." "Calloway's men?" Mitchell nodded grimly. "Got one of them, others ran." Winnie helped him to the house, struggling under his weight. Once inside, she eased him into a chair and quickly built up the fire. Mitchell's face was pale beneath his tan, his breathing labored. "Let me see," Winnie said, gently moving his hand away from the wound. A bullet had grazed his side, cutting a deep furrow through flesh but miraculously missing vital organs. The bleeding had slowed, but Mitchell had clearly lost a significant amount of blood. Winnie worked efficiently, cutting away his shirt, cleaning the wound, and applying pressure to stop the remaining bleeding. Mitchell watched her through half-closed eyes, his jaw clenched against the pain. "You've done this before," he observed as she threaded a needle to stitch the wound. "Once," Winnie admitted. "My father was shot during the troubles in Missouri." "Did he survive?" Winnie's hands stilled momentarily. "The gunshot, yes. The fever that followed, no." Understanding dawned in Mitchell's eyes. "I'll try not to disappoint," he said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as Winnie began stitching. By the time she finished, Mitchell was sweating profusely despite the relative coolness of the room. Winnie helped him to bed, insisting he rest while she prepared a broth to help restore his strength. As she worked in the kitchen, the reality of the situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. Mitchell's confrontation with Calloway had escalated to violence, and it was unlikely to end there. The isolated ranch, once a sanctuary, now felt exposed and vulnerable. When she brought the broth to Mitchell's bedside, he was awake but clearly exhausted. "Thank you," he said as she helped him sit up slightly. "I'm not sure I'd have made it without you." "Drink this," Winnie urged, avoiding his gratitude. "You need to regain your strength." Mitchell obediently sipped the broth, his eyes never leaving her face. "You were afraid to go to town," he said after a while, "but you weren't afraid to face whoever was in that barn, even thinking it might be Calloway's men." Winnie shrugged, uncomfortable with his observation. "I had the shotgun." "It's more than that," Mitchell persisted. "You have courage when it matters, Winnie Blackburn, more than most men I know." His use of her first name startled her, almost as much as his compliment. In the month she'd been at the Flying D, he had always addressed her as Miss Blackburn, maintaining a formal distance despite their growing ease with each other. "Rest now," she said, taking the empty mug from his hands. "We'll talk in the morning." Mitchell caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Stay," he said softly. "Please, just until I fall asleep." The request revealed a vulnerability Winnie hadn't seen in him before. She hesitated only briefly before settling into the chair beside his bed. Mitchell closed his eyes, his breathing gradually slowing as he drifted into sleep, his hand still loosely holding hers. Winnie watched the rise and fall of his chest, feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. She had come to care for this quiet, honorable man who valued her silence and respected her boundaries. The thought of Calloway's men returning, of Mitchell facing them alone in his weakened state, was unbearable. For the first time in years, Winnie found herself wishing for the power of words not to fill silence, but to express the complexity of her feelings, to tell Mitchell that his home had become her home, that his battles were now hers as well. As dawn broke, Winnie gently extricated her hand from Mitchell's and rose to begin the day's tasks. There was much to do, and she suspected difficult days lay ahead. But something had shifted inside her during that long night's vigil. The woman who had been sold for her silence had found, in that very silence, a strength she had forgotten she possessed. Mitchell's recovery was slow but steady. The wound showed no signs of infection, a fact Winnie attributed as much to luck as to her care. For the first week, she insisted he remain in bed, bringing him meals and changing his bandages twice daily. Mitchell chafed at the confinement, but reluctantly admitted he lacked the strength to do otherwise. During those quiet days of recovery, their conversations deepened. Confined to bed with little else to occupy him, Mitchell spoke more than he ever had before, sharing stories of his childhood in Texas, his time as a ranch hand learning the cattle business, and eventually, the circumstances that had brought him to Nevada. "I was engaged once," he revealed one evening as Winnie checked his stitches. "Back in Texas. Her name was Caroline." Winnie's hands paused momentarily, surprised by this personal disclosure. "What happened?" she asked softly. Mitchell's expression grew distant. "Her father was my employer. I was just a foreman then, saving to buy my own land. He approved of me, saw my ambition. But Caroline," he sighed. "She had grander visions for her future than a struggling rancher could provide. When a banker's son from San Antonio began courting her, she chose him instead." "I'm sorry," Winnie said, resuming her work. "Don't be. It was for the best, though I couldn't see it then. Caroline wanted city life, fine dresses, social standing. I wanted this." He gestured toward the window, where the last light of day illuminated the ranch. "Open space, independence, building something with my own hands." Winnie finished applying a fresh bandage and sat back. "You've succeeded," she said. "This is a fine ranch." Mitchell's lips curved in a slight smile. "It's getting there. Still plenty of work ahead." His expression sobered. "If Calloway doesn't destroy it first." The mention of Calloway cast a shadow over their conversation. During Mitchell's convalescence, there had been no further incidents, but Winnie knew the respite was temporary. Once word spread that Mitchell had survived the ambush, Calloway would likely make another move. "Have you considered selling?" she asked tentatively. "Not because you should, but because one man against Calloway's resources seems like poor odds?" Mitchell finished for her. Winnie nodded. "I've considered it," Mitchell admitted, "especially now that it's not just my safety at stake." He looked at her pointedly. "I never meant to draw you into danger, Winnie." "You haven't," she assured him. "I'm here of my own choice." It was true, she realized. Somewhere along the way, what had begun as an arrangement of necessity had transformed into a life she had chosen freely. The Flying D had become her home, not merely her place of employment. Mitchell seemed to read her thoughts. "You could leave," he said quietly. "I've been meaning to tell you I filed paperwork in town before the ambush. You're free legally. I never registered the sale with the county clerk. As far as anyone knows, you're a free woman employed here, of your own volition. You have wages saved enough to go wherever you wish." Winnie stared at him, stunned by this revelation. "You never intended to own me?" Mitchell looked uncomfortable. "I couldn't leave you to that auction. The men bidding, I knew what they wanted, and it wasn't a housekeeper." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Winnie had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "I thought once you were here, safe, I'd explain that you could stay or go as you pleased. But then you seemed content, and I—" "You what?" Winnie prompted when he fell silent. "I enjoyed having you here," he admitted. "Your company, your quiet presence. It was selfish of me to delay telling you." Winnie considered his words carefully. "If I had asked to leave, I would have given you your wages and wished you well," Mitchell said without hesitation, "though I would have regretted your departure." The simple honesty of his statement touched Winnie deeply. After years of being treated as property, as a convenience to be used and discarded, Mitchell's respect for her autonomy felt revolutionary. "I don't want to leave," she said firmly. "This is my home now, too, and I won't be driven from it by Calloway or anyone else." The determination in her voice seemed to surprise Mitchell. For a moment, he simply looked at her, something new and warm kindling in his eyes. "Well then," he said finally, "I suppose we'd better figure out how to defend what's ours." The word hung between them, ours small but significant, a bridge connecting their separate lives into a shared purpose. As Mitchell regained his strength, they developed a strategy. The neighboring ranchers, alerted to Calloway's aggressive tactics, agreed to form a mutual defense alliance. They would patrol their boundaries in pairs, always watching for suspicious activity. The sheriff, while sympathetic, admitted his resources were limited against a man of Calloway's influence, but promised to investigate the ambush. By late August, Mitchell was well enough to resume limited duties around the ranch, though Winnie insisted he avoid strenuous work that might reopen his wound. Their routine adjusted to accommodate his recovery, with Winnie taking on tasks that would normally have been Mitchell's responsibility. One afternoon, as she was mending a section of fence near the creek, Winnie heard hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, her heart rate accelerating until she recognized Mitchell's form. "You shouldn't be riding yet," she chided as he dismounted carefully. "Doctor's orders?" he teased, echoing their earlier exchange. Despite herself, Winnie smiled. "Common sense." "I'll be careful," Mitchell promised, taking the hammer from her hands. "But I can't let you do all the work. Doesn't seem right." "I don't mind," Winnie said honestly. "I like being outdoors." Mitchell studied her face. "You've changed since you came here," he observed. "There's more color in your cheeks, and you speak more freely." Winnie hadn't thought about it, but he was right. The crushing anxiety that had once made words stick in her throat had gradually eased. She still preferred silence to unnecessary chatter, but she no longer feared her own voice. "It's easier to speak when you know you'll be heard," she said simply. Mitchell's expression softened. "I've always heard you, Winnie, even in your silence." The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken feelings. Winnie became acutely aware of Mitchell's proximity, of the warmth in his hazel eyes, of her own quickening pulse. The sound of a wagon interrupted the moment. They turned to see a dust cloud approaching along the road from town. "Were you expecting anyone?" Winnie asked, tension returning to her shoulders. Mitchell shook his head, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Get behind me," he said quietly. Winnie complied, though she resented being treated as someone who needed protection. She had proven her capability during Mitchell's recovery, handling not only household duties, but ranch work as well. As the wagon drew closer, Mitchell relaxed slightly. "It's Warren Baxter," he said, recognizing the owner of Hamilton's General Store, "and his daughter, I think." Warren Baxter was a jovial man in his 50s who had been friendly to Winnie on the few occasions she had accompanied Mitchell to town. His daughter, Penelope, was a pretty young woman of about Winnie's age who had recently returned from schooling in San Francisco. "Afternoon, Mitchell," Warren called as the wagon came to a halt. "Miss Blackburn, hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Mitchell replied, though Winnie detected a hint of reservation in his tone. "What brings you out this way?" "Penny insisted on delivering your order personally," Warren explained, gesturing to the crates in the back of the wagon. Said you might need help carrying things with that injury of yours. Penelope Baxter smiled brightly, her curls bouncing as she nodded. We were so concerned when we heard about the ambush, Mr. Drake. It's simply dreadful what happened. Her gaze lingered on Mitchell appreciatively, taking in his tall form and handsome features. Winnie felt an unexpected pang of something that took her a moment to identify as jealousy. That's very thoughtful, Mitchell said, helping Warren unload the supplies. Though, as you can see, I'm mending well, thanks to Miss Blackburn's excellent care. Penelope's smile dimmed slightly as she turned to Winnie. How fortunate that you have nursing skills, Miss Blackburn. Father said you've been quite indispensable to Mr. Drake since he brought you to the Flying D. There was a subtle emphasis on brought you that made Winnie stiffen. Clearly Penelope knew or suspected the circumstances of Winnie's arrival at the ranch. I've been blessed with Mr. Drake's hospitality, Winnie replied carefully. Why don't we take these supplies to the house? Mitchell suggested, sensing the tension. Winnie, perhaps you could prepare some coffee for our guests. Grateful for the escape, Winnie hurried ahead to the house, her emotions in turmoil. Penelope Baxter represented everything Winnie was not educated, socially adept, and born to a respectable position in society. She was exactly the kind of woman a successful rancher like Mitchell should court. By the time the others reached the house, Winnie had composed herself and had coffee brewing on the stove. She served their guests with quiet efficiency, speaking only when directly addressed. Mitchell noticed her withdrawal, glancing at her with concern whenever Penelope monopolized the conversation. Mr. Drake, you really must attend our harvest celebration next month, Penelope was saying. The whole town gathers at the church for dancing and a potluck supper. It's quite the social event of the season. I'm not much for dancing, Miss Baxter, Mitchell demurred. Oh, but you must come. Everyone will be so disappointed if you don't. And of course, Miss Blackburn is welcome too, she added as an apparent afterthought. Winnie managed a small smile but said nothing. The idea of attending a town social filled her with dread. She had no appropriate clothes, no social graces, and the memory of her humiliating arrival in Hamilton remained painfully fresh. We'll see, Mitchell said noncommittally. Harvest time is busy on the ranch. Warren Baxter, who had been examining Mitchell's bookshelves with interest, rejoined the conversation. Speaking of the ranch, Mitchell, there's talk in town that Calloway's selling his northern properties and focusing his attention on this area might explain his increased pressure on local landowners. Mitchell's expression darkened. Any word on his next move? Warren shook his head. Nothing specific, but I'd keep my guard up if I were you. Always do, Mitchell replied grimly. When the Baxters finally departed, the sun was low on the horizon. Winnie began preparing dinner, her movements more abrupt than usual as she chopped vegetables for a stew. You're quiet, Mitchell observed, leaning against the doorframe. More than usual, I mean. Winnie shrugged, not meeting his eyes. Nothing to say. Mitchell crossed the kitchen and gently took the knife from her hands, setting it aside. Winnie, look at me. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. Did Penelope Baxter's presence upset you? He asked directly. Winnie felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course not. Why would it? Because she represents the world that once rejected you, Mitchell suggested softly. Because she has the confidence that comes from never having been treated as less than human. His perception startled her. She's very pretty, Winnie said instead of answering directly, and clearly interested in you. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. In me? Or in the idea of becoming a rancher's wife now that her father has likely informed her I'm more financially stable than she previously believed? The cynicism in his tone surprised Winnie. You don't like her? I barely know her, Mitchell said with a shrug. She seems pleasant enough, but rather conventional. Conventional can be good, Winnie pointed out. Predictable, safe. Mitchell's lips curved in a half smile. Is that what you think I want? Safety, predictability? He shook his head. I chose the frontier. Winnie, I chose uncertainty and challenge over comfort. He stepped closer, and Winnie found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his eyes. And if I were interested in courting someone, he continued quietly, it wouldn't be Penelope Baxter. The implication hung in the air between them, clear but unspoken. Winnie's heart hammered in her chest, her body frozen in place as Mitchell's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Mitchell," she whispered, his name a question and an acknowledgement all at once. The moment stretched, taut with possibility. Then Mitchell stepped back, breaking the tension. "I should check on the horses before dark," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Don't wait dinner for me if I'm delayed." He was gone before Winnie could respond, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her thoughts in disarray. What had just happened? Had Mitchell almost kissed her? And more importantly, had she wanted him to? The answer to the latter question, Winnie realized with a mixture of exhilaration and terror, was unequivocally yes. September brought cooler temperatures and increased activity as the ranch prepared for winter. Mitchell, fully recovered now, worked from dawn to dusk, repairing buildings, storing feed, and ensuring the Flying D could withstand the harsh Nevada winter. Winnie matched his industry, preserving vegetables from the garden, mending clothes, and assisting with outdoor tasks whenever possible. Their interaction remained cordial, but slightly reserved following the moment in the kitchen. Neither mentioned it directly, but Winnie often caught Mitchell watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, part longing, part uncertainty. The harvest celebration in Hamilton approached, and despite Mitchell's initial reluctance, practical considerations made attendance necessary. The gathering would be an opportunity to strengthen alliances with neighboring ranchers against Callaway's encroachment. Additionally, Warren Baxter had hinted that potential buyers from Carson City would attend, offering Mitchell a chance to secure better prices for his cattle. "We should go," Winnie said one evening as they sat by the fire, Mitchell reading aloud from a book of Mark Twain's stories while she mended a shirt. "To the harvest celebration. It's important for the ranch." Mitchell looked up, surprised by her suggestion. "I thought you were reluctant to attend town functions." Winnie nodded, focusing on her stitches. "I am, but your needs, the ranch's needs, are more important than my discomfort." Mitchell closed the book, his expression serious. "Nothing is more important to me than your comfort, Winnie. If you truly don't want to go, I'll make excuses." The simple declaration warmed Winnie from within. "I want to go," she said, finding that it was true despite her anxiety. "With you." Something flickered in Mitchell's eyes, pleasure, perhaps, or relief. "Very well," he agreed. "We'll attend together." The night of the celebration arrived clear and cool, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Winnie had spent days altering one of her plain dresses, adding lace salvaged from an old tablecloth to the collar and cuffs, and dyeing the faded blue fabric a deeper indigo using berries from the creek bank. When she emerged from her room, Mitchell was waiting by the wagon, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and a crisp white shirt that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the appreciation in his gaze made Winnie's breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Winnie smoothed her skirt self-consciously. "It's just an old dress." "It's not the dress," Mitchell replied, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. The ride to Hamilton was filled with companionable silence, broken occasionally by Mitchell pointing out constellations or sharing anecdotes about previous harvest celebrations. His calm presence soothed Winnie's nervousness, reminding her that she wouldn't face the town's scrutiny alone. The church was transformed for the occasion, its plain exterior festooned with autumn leaves and its interior warmed by dozens of lanterns. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by townspeople and surrounding ranchers. A small band played lively tunes, and couples already twirled on the makeshift dance floor. Winnie hesitated at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the noise and activity. Mitchell's hand found the small of her back, a reassuring pressure. "We don't have to stay long," he murmured close to her ear. Winnie squared her shoulders. "I'm all right." They moved through the crowd, Mitchell greeting acquaintances and introducing Winnie as Miss Blackburn, my... He paused, seeming unsure how to categorize their relationship. "Partner," Winnie supplied, surprising herself with her boldness. "In managing the Flying D." Mitchell's eyes widened slightly before crinkling at the corners with pleasure. "Yes," he agreed. "My partner." The evening progressed more pleasantly than Winnie had anticipated. Most people were welcoming, interested in her background and skills without prying into uncomfortable territory. If anyone remembered her arrival in Hamilton under less dignified circumstances, they had the grace not to mention it. Warren Baxter introduced Mitchell to the cattle buyers from Carson City, and they soon fell into detailed negotiations. Winnie excused herself to sample the refreshments, finding a quiet corner from which to observe the festivities. Miss Blackburn. Penelope Baxter appeared at her side, resplendent in a fashionable green dress that emphasized her slender figure. "How lovely to see you again. Are you enjoying the celebration?" "Very much," Winnie replied politely. "The decorations are beautiful." "I arranged them myself," Penelope said with evident pride. "Father says I have a natural eye for aesthetics. I'm sure your upbringing didn't include much instruction in the finer points of social gathering preparation." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. Winnie maintained her composure, refusing to be baited. "My mother taught me that true hospitality lies in making guests feel welcome, regardless of decoration." Penelope's smile tightened. "How quaint." She glanced across the room to where Mitchell stood deep in conversation with the cattle buyers. "Mr. Drake seems to be doing well since his injury. You must be relieved." "Yes," Winnie agreed cautiously, sensing an undercurrent to the conversation. "It's admirable how dedicated you are to your employer," Penelope continued, "though it must be quite isolated out there, just the two of you. People talk, you know." Winnie's cheeks warmed at the implication. "Mr. Drake is a gentleman," she said firmly, "and I value my position at the Flying D." "Of course," Penelope said with false sympathy. "It must be a vast improvement over your previous circumstances. Father told me how Mr. Drake acquired you. Quite the romantic rescue, wasn't it? Though surely you understand it can never be more than an employment arrangement. A man of Mr. Drake's standing will eventually need a proper wife, someone who can help him navigate society as his ranch prospers." The words struck Winnie like physical blows, not because they were cruel, though they were certainly intended to be, but because they echoed her own doubts. Mitchell deserved a wife from his own social sphere, someone who could bring connections and respectability to his name, not a former slave who had been sold in the street like cattle. Before Winnie could formulate a response, Mitchell appeared at her side, his expression concerned as he took in her distressed face. "Everything all right?" he asked, his gaze moving between Winnie and Penelope. "Perfectly," Penelope responded with a bright smile. "I was just telling Miss Blackburn how fortunate she is to have found such a generous employer." Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Winnie is much more than an employee, Miss Baxter. As I believe she mentioned earlier, she's my partner in all aspects of ranch management." His emphasis on partner was unmistakable, and Penelope's smile faltered. "How progressive of you," she said, her tone cooler. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the refreshments." As Penelope departed, Mitchell turned to Winnie. "What did she say to upset you?" Winnie shook her head. "Nothing important." Mitchell looked unconvinced, but didn't press the issue. Instead, he held out his hand. "Would you dance with me?" The unexpected invitation momentarily stunned Winnie. "I don't know how," she admitted. "Neither do I, really," Mitchell confessed with a small smile. "We can stumble through it together." The band was playing a slow waltz, allowing them to move at a manageable pace. Mitchell's hand was warm at her waist, his other hand gentle around hers as he guided her in simple steps. Winnie gradually relaxed into the rhythm, finding unexpected joy in the movement. "Everyone's watching," she murmured, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. "Let them," Mitchell replied, his voice low and intimate. "I'm only concerned with your opinion, Winnie, not theirs." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart swell. In that moment, the whispers and stares faded to insignificance. There was only Mitchell, solid and steady, his gaze holding hers as they moved together in the lantern light. When the music ended, Mitchell didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" he asked. Winnie nodded, grateful for the suggestion. The church had grown warm, with so many bodies packed into the small space, and she longed for a moment of quiet. They slipped out a side door into the cool night air. Stars still spangled the sky, and the faint strains of music drifted from within the church. Mitchell led Winnie to a bench beneath an old cottonwood tree, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. "Better?" he asked as they sat. "Much," Winnie sighed, tilting her face up to the night sky. "It's beautiful." "Yes," Mitchell agreed, though when Winnie glanced over, she found him looking at her rather than the stars. A comfortable silence settled between them. Winnie was struck again by how easily they could share space without the pressure of conversation. How Mitchell never demanded she fill the air with words simply to ease his own discomfort. "What Penelope said," Mitchell began after a while, "about you being my employee. It's not how I think of you, Winnie." Winnie looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "It's the arrangement we agreed upon. Initially, yes, but things have changed, haven't they?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Winnie's heart raced as she considered how to respond. The truth was that everything had changed. She no longer thought of Mitchell as her employer, nor herself as his housekeeper. What they had become to each other was harder to define friend, certainly, but there was something more, something deeper that had grown in the silence between them. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Things have changed." Mitchell shifted closer on the bench, his hand finding hers. "When I first saw you in Hamilton, standing there with those men bidding on you like you were livestock, I was outraged, not just at the situation, but at the deadness in your eyes, like you'd accepted that your worth could be measured in dollars." Winnie winced at the memory, but Mitchell continued, his voice gentle. "I didn't plan to buy you. I intended to stop the auction, to create enough of a disturbance that you might slip away in the confusion. But then I saw the fear in your eyes, and I realized you had nowhere to go, no one to protect you. So you purchased me instead," Winnie said, her voice barely audible. Mitchell's fingers tightened around hers. "I purchased your freedom," he corrected, though I did a poor job of explaining that initially. He turned to face her directly, his expression earnest in the starlight. "What I never expected was how quickly you would become essential to me, not as a housekeeper, but as a presence in my life. Your quiet strength, your gentle determination, the way you listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. You filled spaces in my life I didn't even know were empty." Tears pricked at Winnie's eyes, but she held them back, afraid to break the moment with emotion. "I know I have no right to ask for more than your friendship," Mitchell continued, his voice roughening. "Your circumstances when you came to the Flying D were coerced, not chosen. I would understand completely if you wish to leave now that you have the means to start fresh somewhere untainted by memories of being treated as property." "Is that what you want?" Winnie asked, holding her breath for his answer. "For me to leave?" "God, no," Mitchell said fervently. "The very thought of it." He shook his head, seemingly unable to find words adequate to express his feelings. Instead, he brought his free hand up to cup her cheek, his touch feather light, as if he feared she might shatter or flee if he pressed too firmly. "I want you to stay, Winnie. Not as my housekeeper, not even as my partner in running the ranch, though you've proven more than capable in that regard." "Then as what?" Winnie whispered, though she thought she knew the answer, could see it in the way Mitchell looked at her, feel it in the gentle caress of his thumb against her cheekbone. "As my wife," Mitchell said simply. "If you could ever consider loving a man who deals better with cattle than people, who prefers books to conversation, who might never be wealthy or important, but who would cherish you every day of his life." Joy bloomed in Winnie's chest, so intense it was almost painful. For a moment she couldn't speak, her silence no longer a prison, but a pause in which to gather the fullness of her feelings. "I already do," she said finally, her voice clear and steady. "Love you, I mean." Mitchell's smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual reserve and lighting his eyes with a happiness Winnie had never seen there before. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Mitchell rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Winnie asked, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw in wonder. "I needed to be sure you were choosing me freely, not out of gratitude or obligation, that you stayed because you wanted to, not because you felt you had nowhere else to go." His consideration, his respect for her agency, even at the cost of his own desires, confirmed what Winnie already knew, that Mitchell Drake was a rare man indeed, one worthy of the love she had been so afraid to give. "I choose you," she said firmly, "today and all the days to come." Mitchell kissed her again, with more confidence this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Winnie responded with a passion that surprised them both, her natural reserve melting away in the warmth of his embrace. They might have remained there beneath the stars for hours had a burst of laughter from the church not reminded them of their surroundings. Reluctantly, Mitchell released her, though he kept her hand firmly in his. We should return before our absence is noted, he said, helping her to her feet. Though I'm finding it difficult to care what anyone thinks at the moment. Winnie smoothed her skirts, aware that her cheeks were flushed and her hair likely disheveled. What will people say, she wondered aloud, about us? Mitchell's expression hardened slightly. They'll say what they please, but it won't change how I feel. You're the woman I love, Winnie Blackburn, and I don't give a damn who knows it. The fierceness of his declaration swept away the last of Winnie's doubts. Together, they returned to the celebration, hands intertwined, their shared silence no longer a barrier, but a sanctuary in which their love had taken root and flourished. The news of Mitchell Drake's engagement to his former housekeeper spread through Hamilton like wildfire. Some approved, noting that Winnie's quiet competence had transformed both Mitchell and his ranch for the better. Others whispered behind their hands about the impropriety, the social mismatch, the scandalous circumstances of Winnie's arrival in town. Mitchell and Winnie paid little heed to the gossip. They were too busy preparing for winter and planning their future together. They decided on a small wedding before the first snow, with only trusted neighbors and friends in attendance. One crisp October morning, as they shared breakfast, Mitchell raised a topic they had previously avoided. Calloway hasn't made a move since the ambush, he observed, refilling Winnie's coffee cup. It's been almost 2 months. Winnie nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps he's reconsidering his strategy after you wounded one of his men. Perhaps, Mitchell agreed, though he looked unconvinced. Or he's planning something bigger. I don't trust this silence. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching riders reached them. Mitchell was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. His expression darkened as he counted at least 5 men approaching the ranch. Stay inside, he told Winnie, reaching for his gun belt. No, Winnie said firmly, standing to join him. We face this together. Mitchell looked as though he might argue, then nodded grudgingly. Stay behind me, at least. They stepped onto the porch as the riders entered the yard. Leading them was a heavy-set man with silver hair and an expensive suit that marked him as a man of means, Victor Calloway himself, not merely his hired men. Mitchell Drake, Calloway called, reining in his horse. I believe it's time we had a proper conversation. Mitchell's hand rested on his holstered gun. Nothing to discuss, Calloway. My answer hasn't changed. Calloway dismounted with surprising agility for his bulk. I think you'll want to hear my proposition before you dismiss it out of hand. May we speak inside, like civilized men? Mitchell hesitated, clearly reluctant to allow Calloway into their home. We can talk here, he said finally. Your men stay mounted. Calloway shrugged his agreement and approached the porch alone. His shrewd eyes assessed Winnie with interest. Miss Blackburn, I presume? Your reputation for competence has reached even my ears, and now I hear congratulations are in order for your engagement. The fact that Calloway knew so much about their personal affairs was unsettling. Winnie remained silent, watchful. What do you want, Calloway? Mitchell asked bluntly. The cattle baron smiled thinly. Direct, as always. Very well. I've come to offer you a partnership, not a buyout. Mitchell's eyebrows rose in surprise. Partnership? Yes, I've been watching how you've developed this ranch over the past few years. You have a good eye for land and cattle. More importantly, you've gained the respect of your neighbors, something money can't always buy. Calloway gestured expansively. I'm proposing a joint venture. You maintain ownership of your land, but we combine resources to expand both our operations. My capital, your local connections. We could create something significant here. Mitchell's expression remained skeptical. And the water rights? Shared, of course. With proper management, there's enough for both our herds. It was a surprisingly reasonable offer, and Mitchell's stance relaxed slightly as he considered it. Winnie, however, felt a prickle of unease. Calloway's sudden change of tactics seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed. Why the change of heart? She asked, speaking for the first time. After sending men to ambush Mr. Drake? Calloway's eyes narrowed at her directness. Business is business, Miss Blackburn. Sometimes pressure is applied to test resolve. Mr. Drake proved his mettle. I respect that. Mitchell crossed his arms. And if I refuse this partnership? Then we remain competitors, Calloway said with a shrug. Though I hope you'll at least consider the benefits before deciding. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a document. A preliminary agreement outlining the terms. Take your time reviewing it. I'll be in Hamilton for another week." Mitchell accepted the paper cautiously. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Calloway tipped his hat to Winnie. "Miss Blackburn, a pleasure to meet the woman who tamed both Mitchell Drake and his wild ranch. I look forward to our future association." With that, he returned to his horse and led his men away, leaving Mitchell and Winnie standing on the porch, the unexpected offer hanging between them like a question mark. "What do you think?" Mitchell asked once they were alone, turning the document over in his hands. Winnie considered carefully before responding. "It seems too convenient, too sudden a change from threats to partnership." Mitchell nodded in agreement. "My thoughts exactly. Though the terms, if genuine, would solve our problems with Calloway and provide capital for expansion." They spent the evening reviewing the document, discussing its implications. The proposed partnership would indeed be advantageous in many ways. Calloway's resources combined with Mitchell's land and local relationships could create a formidable operation. Yet neither of them could shake the suspicion that there was more to Calloway's offer than appeared on the surface. "I'll speak with Warren Baxter tomorrow," Mitchell decided finally. "He might have insight into Calloway's true motivations." The following day, Mitchell rode to Hamilton while Winnie remained at the ranch, alert for any sign of trouble. She was in the garden, harvesting the last of the autumn vegetables, when Bandit began barking furiously, signaling an arrival. Wiping her hands on her apron, Winnie hurried to the front yard, relieved to see Mitchell returning earlier than expected. His expression was grim as he dismounted. "What is it?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Calloway's been buying up loans from the bank in Carson City," Mitchell explained, leading his horse to the water trough, "including the mortgage on the Flying D." Winnie felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "What does that mean for us?" "It means his partnership offer is a sham," Mitchell said bitterly. "If I refuse, he can call in the loan. I'd have to pay the full amount immediately or forfeit the ranch." "Do we have enough to pay it?" Winnie asked, though she already knew the answer. Mitchell had invested every spare dollar in improving the ranch, expanding the herd, and purchasing additional acreage. Mitchell shook his head. "Not even close. The cattle sales from the Harvest Festival will help, but we'd still be short by more than half." Winnie considered this setback, her mind racing through possible solutions. "What about a bank loan?" "Warren tried that angle already. Calloway's got the bankers in his pocket. They won't lend to me knowing he wants this land." The unfairness of it burned in Winnie's chest. After everything Mitchell had built, after all their plans for the future, to have it threatened by one man's greed seemed unconscionable. "There must be something we can do," she insisted. Mitchell's expression softened as he looked at her. "There's one option," he said reluctantly. "The partnership. If I accept, he can't foreclose on the loan without harming his own investment." "But we'd be tied to him indefinitely," Winnie pointed out. "Subject to his decisions, his control." "Yes," Mitchell acknowledged grimly. "It's a choice between losing everything or compromising our independence." That evening, they sat before the fire, weighing their limited options. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first hint of winter's approach. Inside, the warmth of their home, the home they had created together, surrounded them like a shield against the encroaching threat. "Whatever we decide," Winnie said softly, "we decide together." Mitchell pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Together," he agreed. "Though I hate involving you in this mess." Winnie looked up at him, determination hardening her resolve. "I chose this life, Mitchell. I chose you. That means facing challenges as your partner, not hiding from them as someone to be protected." Her words seemed to ease something in Mitchell, a tension he'd been carrying since Calloway's visit. "You're remarkable, Winnie Blackburn," he said with quiet admiration. "The strongest person I've ever known." They decided to sleep on the decision, hoping clarity might come with the morning. But as dawn broke, bringing with it a light dusting of early snow, a new complication arose. Warren Baxter arrived at the ranch, his normally jovial face creased with worry. "Calloway's pushing for an answer," he reported over coffee at the kitchen table. "He's telling people in town that he'll be taking over the Flying D by the end of the week, one way or another." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "He's that confident?" "He's got reason to be," Warren admitted reluctantly, "but there might be another way." He glanced at Winnie, who was pouring more coffee. "It's not my place to suggest it, but circumstances being what they are." "What is it?" Mitchell prompted. Warren sighed heavily. Penelope. She has her own inheritance from her mother's side, substantial enough to pay off your mortgage and then some. She's made it clear she'd be willing to invest in your ranch. The implication was clear, and Winnie's hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. Penelope Baxter was offering financial salvation in exchange for Mitchell's hand in marriage. That's not an option, Mitchell said firmly, reaching across the table to take Winnie's hand. I've made my choice of partner, in business and in life. Warren nodded, seeming relieved rather than disappointed by Mitchell's immediate rejection. I told Penny as much, but she insisted I mention it. Headstrong girl, my daughter. We appreciate the information, Warren, Mitchell said, steering the conversation back to practical matters. But we'll find another way. After Warren departed, Mitchell and Winnie sat in silence, the weight of their predicament settling over them like the snow outside light now, but promising to deepen with time. We could sell the cattle, Winnie suggested finally. All of them, not just the surplus. Mitchell shook his head. Even at premium prices, it wouldn't be enough, and we'd have nothing to rebuild with come spring. Another silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then Winnie straightened, an idea forming. The books, she said suddenly. Mitchell looked puzzled. What about them? Your collection, some of those volumes are rare, valuable, first editions. They could be worth something significant. Hope flickered briefly in Mitchell's eyes before fading. Maybe in San Francisco or back east, but finding a buyer quickly enough would be nearly impossible. Not necessarily, Winnie countered, warming to her idea. There was a man at the Harvest Festival, Professor Whitman from the university in Carson City. He mentioned his institution was building a library, seeking notable works. Warren would know how to contact him. Mitchell considered this possibility. It would mean selling my entire collection, books I've gathered over years of searching. I know how much they mean to you, Winnie said gently, remembering how Mitchell's love of literature had been one of the first things to connect them. They're just objects, Mitchell said after a moment's reflection. Important to me, yes, but not as important as our future together, our home. He rose and moved to the study, where floor-to-ceiling shelves housed his carefully curated collection. Winnie followed, watching as he ran his fingers along the spines, pausing at certain volumes that clearly held special significance. This was the first book I ever purchased, he said, pulling out a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. I was 16, working as a ranch hand, saved for 3 months to buy it. Winnie stepped closer, slipping her arm around his waist in silent support. And this, Mitchell continued, indicating a leather-bound collection of Shakespeare's works, I found in a pawn shop in Denver. The owner had no idea of its value. He replaced the books carefully, his decision made. Have Warren contact Professor Whitman. If the university wants the collection, it's theirs, provided they can pay quickly. The following days passed in a flurry of activity. Professor Whitman arrived to assess the book collection and, to Mitchell and Winnie's relief, expressed genuine enthusiasm about acquiring it for the university library. The price he offered was substantial, not enough to cover the entire mortgage, but a significant portion. Combined with the cattle sales and our savings, we might just make it, Mitchell said, as they reviewed their finances. It will be close. Winnie had been making calculations of her own. I have some money saved, she said quietly. From my wages. Mitchell looked up, surprise evident on his face. Winnie, no. That's your security, your independence. What good is independence if I lose my home? She countered. If we lose our home? Before Mitchell could respond, the sound of multiple riders approaching put them both on alert. Through the window, they could see Calloway and his men entering the yard, their expressions suggesting this was not a social call. Stay inside, Mitchell said, reaching for his gun. This time, Winnie didn't argue. She watched anxiously from the window as Mitchell stepped onto the porch to confront the unwelcome visitors. It's time for your answer, Drake, Calloway called without preamble. Partnership or foreclosure? Mitchell stood his ground, his stance deceptively casual, though Winnie could see the tension in his shoulders. Neither, he replied evenly. I'll be paying off the mortgage in full by the end of the week. Calloway's eyebrows rose in evident surprise before his expression hardened into skepticism. Is that so? And where exactly will you get that kind of money? That's my concern, not yours, Mitchell said coolly. But rest assured, the payment will be made in full through proper legal channels. The cattle baron studied Mitchell's face, searching for signs of bluff. Finding none, his demeanor shifted, a calculating look replacing his initial disbelief. "Perhaps I underestimated your resources," he admitted grudgingly, "though I still believe a partnership would be mutually beneficial." "I prefer to maintain sole ownership of what's mine," Mitchell replied, his meaning extending beyond the ranch to include the woman watching from inside. Calloway recognized the implicit rejection of his broader ambitions. His mouth tightened into a thin line. "Very well, Drake. Have it your way for now. But this territory isn't big enough for two stubborn men with expansion in mind. Our paths will cross again." "When they do," Mitchell said with quiet confidence, "I'll be ready." Calloway signaled to his men, and they wheeled their horses around, departing as abruptly as they had arrived. Mitchell remained on the porch until they were out of sight, then returned to the house where Winnie waited. "Will he accept it?" she asked anxiously. "When we pay the mortgage?" Mitchell nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "He'll have to, but Calloway's right about one thing. Our troubles with him aren't over. This is just one battle." Winnie moved to embrace him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Then we'll face the next battle when it comes," she said firmly. Together. The following week brought the culmination of their financial maneuvering. The book collection was carefully packed and transported to Carson City, where Professor Whitman presented them with a bank draft for the agreed-upon sum. Combined with their savings, the cattle sales, and despite Mitchell's initial reluctance, Winnie's modest contribution, they had exactly enough to pay off the mortgage in full. The transaction was completed in the Hamilton Bank, with Warren Baxter witnessing. Calloway, true to Mitchell's prediction, had no choice but to accept the payment, though his displeasure was evident in every line of his body as he signed the necessary papers. "This isn't over, Drake," he muttered as they concluded their business. "For now it is," Mitchell replied calmly. "My land, my water, my choice." They left the bank with the satisfied exhaustion of those who have fought a difficult battle and emerged victorious, if somewhat battered. The mortgage was paid, the Flying D was securely theirs, and though Mitchell's beloved books were gone, their future together was assured. "What now?" Winnie asked as they rode home through the gathering dusk. Mitchell smiled, some of the tension of recent weeks finally easing from his features. "Now, Miss Blackburn, I believe we have a wedding to plan." November brought the first heavy snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse that stretched to the distant mountains. The Flying D, with its sturdy buildings and well-stocked barns, stood as a haven against winter's approach. Inside the main house, preparations for a very different occasion were underway. Mitchell and Winnie had decided on a simple ceremony to be performed by the circuit preacher who would visit Hamilton the following weekend. Warren Baxter and his wife would stand as witnesses, along with several neighboring ranchers who had supported them against Calloway's machinations. The evening before their wedding, Mitchell presented Winnie with a small velvet box. Inside was a ring not elaborate or ostentatious, but a beautifully crafted band of gold set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," Mitchell explained as Winnie gazed at it in wonder. "The only thing of hers I kept when I left Texas. I always thought, if I ever found someone worthy of it." Winnie's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered, the simple elegance of the piece reflecting their relationship, unadorned but precious, built on substance rather than show. They were married the next day in the Hamilton church, the same building where they had first danced together. Winnie wore a new dress of deep blue, ordered specially from Carson City with some of her saved wages. Mitchell, handsome in a suit that Warren had helped him select, watched her walk toward him with an expression of such undisguised love that Winnie felt her heart might burst with happiness. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken in clear voices that carried to the rafters of the small church. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell's kiss was tender but possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with a meal at the town's only hotel, followed by music and dancing. Even Penelope Baxter attended, her initial disappointment apparently set aside as she wished the couple well with what seemed like genuine goodwill. As the evening progressed, Winnie found herself standing beside Warren Baxter, watching Mitchell accept congratulations from a group of ranchers. "He's a changed man since you came into his life," Warren observed, his tone approving. "More settled, happier." "He changed my life too," Winnie replied softly. "Gave me back myself when I'd forgotten who I was." Warren nodded thoughtfully. Funny how things work out. If you hadn't been brought to Hamilton that day. If Mitchell hadn't been in town at that exact moment, Winnie continued, still amazed at how close they had come to never meeting at all. Call it fate or providence, Warren said with a smile, but I'd say you were meant to find each other. Winnie watched as Mitchell caught her eye across the room, his expression softening, as it always did when he looked at her. Yes, she thought, they had been meant for each other, two quiet souls who had found in each other's silence not emptiness, but understanding. The journey back to the Flying D that night was made in companionable silence, the stars overhead and the snow-covered landscape stretching around them. As they approached the ranch, Mitchell pulled the wagon to a halt at the top of the rise overlooking their property. "What is it?" Winnie asked, concerned by the unexpected stop. Mitchell turned to her, taking her gloved hands in his. "I wanted a moment, just us before we go home, to tell you—" He paused, searching for words. "To tell you that when I said I liked the silence between us, it wasn't just about appreciating your quiet nature. It was about feeling, for the first time in my life, that I didn't need to be anything other than exactly who I am." Winnie squeezed his hands, understanding perfectly what he meant. "I felt the same way," she said softly. "With you, my silence wasn't a flaw or a burden. It was accepted, valued even." "More than valued," Mitchell corrected gently. "Loved as I love every part of you." He leaned forward to kiss her, his lips warm despite the cold night air. When they parted, Winnie rested her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. They remained like that for several minutes, savoring the moment and the view of their home below, smoke curling from the chimney in welcome. "Ready?" Mitchell asked finally. Winnie nodded, smiling up at him. "Ready." As they continued down the slope toward the ranch, toward their future together, Winnie thought of all the silences that had shaped her life. The frightened silence of her childhood after her parents' death. The protective silence of her years in service. The resigned silence of the day she was sold in Hamilton. But now, with Mitchell, she had discovered a different kind of silence, one that spoke of acceptance, of understanding, of love that required no constant affirmation. It was in that silence, paradoxically, that she had found her voice at last. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil. The Flying D flourished under the care of its owners, the herd expanding as new calves were born and additional cattle purchased with the profits of the previous season. Winnie stood on the porch one April morning, watching as Mitchell worked with a young horse in the corral. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her abdomen, a secret joy she had only confirmed the week before and had yet to share with her husband. Tonight, she decided, as Mitchell's laughter reached her across the yard, tonight she would tell him about the new life growing within her, the tangible proof of their love and the continuation of the legacy they were building together. As if sensing her thoughts, Mitchell looked up and waved, his smile warming her from the inside out. Winnie waved back, thinking of the long journey that had brought her to this place, this man, this life. She had been sold for being too quiet, deemed lacking because her words didn't flow freely. But Mitchell Drake had seen beyond her silence to the strength and passion beneath. He had recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the deepest connections often happened in the spaces between words. "I like the silence between us," he had said on that fateful day in Hamilton. And in that silence, they had built a love that needed no explanation, a partnership that required no constant reassurance, a home that welcomed them both exactly as they were. Winnie descended the porch steps and crossed the yard to where Mitchell waited, ready to share their newest blessing and to continue writing their story together, sometimes with words, but always with the eloquent silence of two hearts beating as one.